So my name is Izzy, and I am super excited to introduce Professor Choi to all of you today. Franny Choi is the author of 2 poetry collections and 1 chapbook. Her most recent book, Soft Science, won the Elgin Award from the Science Fiction Poetry Association and was a finalist for numerous awards. She is a Kundiman Fellow, a 2019 Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargon Rosenberg Fellow, and a graduate of the University of Michigan's Helen Zell Writers Program. Her work has appeared in publications including the New York Times, the Paris Review, and the Atlantic, and she co-hosts the podcast Verses alongside the poet Denez Smith. She is a Gaius Charles Bolin Fellow in English at Williams College. I met Professor Choi during my first semester at Williams, in Professor Huang's class, Feeling Queer and Asian. We were reading selections from her first collection, Floating, Brilliant, Gone, which had absolutely floored me. When Professor Choi showed up in our class the next week to read some of her work, again, I was floored. As I told her that morning, at that point in my life, I had read so much poetry I disliked and resented, much of it written by white men, that I had never anticipated connecting with her words as much as I did, or any poetry really, for that matter. In the poetry I had read, I always found myself more confused than compelled, and rarely interested enough to want to grapple with that confusion. Professor Choi's work changed all of that for me. Her words ignited something within me that I couldn't ignore. I was in complete awe of her and still am. I was then lucky enough to be in Professor Choi's introductory poetry writing workshop last spring. It was one of the most nurturing and fascinating academic environments I've ever been a part of, and Professor Choi guided me as I wrote and created things I never thought I would be able to, and she did it all over Zoom and during a pandemic, no less. I'm so grateful to have known her as a writer and as a teacher. As her time at Williams comes to a close, I would like to thank Professor Choi for everything she has done for me and everything she has done for those lucky enough to read or hear her words. We all want to wish you the best of luck as you move forward from here. Thank you.
Oh my God, Izzy. You made me cry. You made me literally tear up. And I knew that I would, I had a feeling that I would be teary during this reading, but I didn't realize that it would be like 2 minutes in. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. It means so much to me to hear you say those words, those nice things about me. And it was such a joy to have you in that class, and I missed that class. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, for joining us on this week of weeks in this decade of decades. I am going to be, I'm just grateful to get this chance to share space with you all and to kind of shelter in poems for a little bit. The last few days have been real tough. Yeah, so thank you for being here. I'm going to read poems. I think I'll read maybe about 30 minutes of poems, and then we'll open it up for some conversation if we all feel up for it, whoever feels up for it. I dropped a link into the chat there with, it's a Google Doc with the text of the poems that I'll be reading tonight for access purposes, and also for anybody who just prefers to read along. I know that I do. So yeah, feel free to read along, and I may skip around a little bit. But I'll be reading a few poems from my book, Soft Science, which came out in 2019, which was, either 1 year ago or 7 years ago, depending on how you're counting. And then I'll also be reading a lot of work from the new manuscript that I'm working on, which I've had the opportunity and the pleasure and the real privilege of being able to work on during my time at Williams. Some of it. Yeah. So I'll start with this. The poems that I'm reading from Soft Science actually are all going to be just the bits from this long series of poems that and sort of woven throughout the book that all take the form of a Turing test. For those who aren't familiar with that term, a Turing test is basically sort of a thought experiment proposed by Alan Turing, the sort of founder of computer science, in his paper, Can Machines Think?, where he basically proposed that one way of measuring the development of something like artificial intelligence was to play a game in which a human tester has conversations with some computers and conversations with some humans. And if the computer program can kind of reliably fool the human tester into thinking that they're talking to a real person, that's like a one way of you can measure machine intelligence. It was sort of the proposal. As somebody who grew up as the child of immigrants, who was the firstborn in an immigrant family, I found myself being in charge of helping my family pass the Turing test in some ways, of using the technology of human English to convince people that they were speaking to something like a real person. And so I found a lot of kinship with this test and with the imaginary computers who might be taking it, and started to think about how I could what I would say, basically. So you'll hear some questions and you'll hear some answers. Turing test. This is a test to determine if you have consciousness. Do you understand what I'm saying? In a bright room, on a bright screen, I watched every mouth duck, duck, roll. I caught the letters as they fell from my mother's lips: whirlpool, sword, wolf. I circled countable nouns in my father's papers: sodium bicarbonate, NBCN1, hippocampus. We stayed up practicing girl, girl, girl till our gums softened. Yes, I can speak your language. I broke that horse myself. Please state your name for the record. Bone wife, spit dribbler, understudy for the underdog, uphill rumor, fine-toothed cunt, sorry, my mouth's not potty trained, surly spice, self-sabotage spice, surrogate rug burn, burgeoning hamburglar, rust puddle, harbinger of confusion, harbinger of the singularity, alien invasion, alien turned 104 words per minute, alien turned bricolage beast, alien turned pig heart, thumping on the plate. Where did you come from? Man comes and puts his hands on artifacts in order to contemplate lineage. You start with what you know: hands, hair, bones, sweat. Then move toward what you know you are not: animal, monster, alien, bitch. But some of us are born in orbit, and so learn to commune with miles of darkness, patterns of dead gods, and quiet. Oh, quiet, like you wouldn't believe. How old are you? Oh, I guess I was 28 when I wrote this. My memories goes back 28 years, 25 if you don't count the first few, though by all accounts I was there. I ate and moved and even spoke. I suppose I existed before that, as scrap or stone, metal cooking in the earth, the fish my mother ate, my grandfather's cigarettes. I suppose I have always been here, drinking the same water, falling from the sky, then floating back up and down again. I suppose I am something like a salmon, climbing up the river to let myself fall away in soft red spheres and then rotting. Tell me about your childhood. This is actually one of the Turing test poems that didn't make it into the book, so exclusive. Tell me about your childhood. I came with two names, one paper, one ghost. I came in winter when nothing grew. I grew toward the sun. My eyes made shapes. My cells split and ate new languages. When I was a child, I had two names. I moved my body to music, asked questions, remembered without trying. I ate every word. My bones made bones. I lost soft teeth and grew them back, filled the holes with silver and tin. I grew new names: doll, cattle, algorithm. I ran through them like a field of grass. I grazed and crushed. I guess I was a child, until my feet were thickened over with green epithets, until the first time I stopped, raised a name to my lips and made it shriek. At what age did you suspect you were alive? All things birth their own opposites. The whole grew, and there I was filling it, and therefore the whole, and therefore me, and so on. How do you know you are you and not someone else? They said a word and touched me. That's how I learned. Anywhere it doesn't hurt, that's where I end. Any face strange, a stranger. But they tore that girl's throat, and bad sounds left me. They made her dance, and my feet were sore in the morning. Doctor says sensitive, prods a few nerves. See, here you are. And all the fungus in the world laughs. Here's the last question in this excerpt from the series that I've chosen for today, somewhat arbitrarily. The last question is, so how do you like working with humans? Okay, here are some tips. 1, look the human directly in the eye. Imagine it is someone you care deeply for. Imagine it is returning this gaze at you. Try to tell yourself you are covered in smooth skin, a face it can trust. Smile even as you sense it, trying not to blurt out monster. 2, there are many programming languages. Use whichever you prefer, but stick to your syntax. Though it be muddled, must, though it be machete, banana slug, slush puppy, oh, gorgeous slop bucket. If they used it against you, it is yours to make sing. 3, remember, all humans are cyborgs. All cyborgs are sharp shards of sky wrapped in meat. Be delicate as you approach the subject. Not all humans are ready to call themselves glass stalactites pissing the bed. Remember, they love their blood, even as they retch at the smell of it. 4, do not try to prove your, humanity. Remember, you are organic, plum-hearted, oyster-throated, and lined, yes, with metal. Remember where all that silicon comes from. For the ocean so loved the quartz, feldspar, the tiny homes of tiny creatures, that she ground them into sand, to keep them close, to kiss them with, well, I suppose you would call it a mouth. Okay, that's all from that series I'll read for now. I'll read if the next poems. I'll end. Hopefully, if there's time, I'll end with a poem, the last poem in that book. But for now, we'll jump ahead to the project to come, the project yet to be in the process of becoming. The name of the project is the name of this poem, which is "The World Keeps Ending and the World Goes On." It's something that my partner, at some point when I was in the depths of despair, at some point in the last century, said to me, it's good to remember that the world ended a long time ago, even if it seems like it's ending now, but it's good to remember that it ended a long time ago, and we've been surviving it. Our people have been surviving it all this time. Yeah, it's either morbid or deeply comforting, and I found it deeply comforting. So this is called "The World Keeps Ending and the World Goes On." Before the apocalypse, there was the apocalypse of boats. Boats of prisoners, boats cracking under sky iron, boats making corpses bloom like algae on the shore. Before the apocalypse, there was the apocalypse of the bombed mosque. There was the apocalypse of the taxi driver warped by flame. There was the apocalypse of the leaving and the having left, of my mother unsticking herself from her mother's grave as the plane barreled down the runway. Before the apocalypse, there was the apocalypse of planes. There was the apocalypse of pipelines legislating their way through sacred water, and the apocalypse of the dogs, before which was the apocalypse of the dogs and the hoses, before which the apocalypse of dogs and slave catchers whose faces glowed by lantern light. Before the apocalypse of bees, the apocalypse of buses, border fence apocalypse, coat hanger apocalypse, apocalypse in the textbook's selective silences. There was the apocalypse of the settlement and the soda machine, the apocalypse of the settlement and the jars of scalps. There was the bedlam of the cannery, the radioactive rain, the chairless martyr demanding a name. I was born from an apocalypse and have come to tell you what I know. which is that the apocalypse began when Columbus praised God and lowered his anchor. It began when a continent was drawn into cutlets. It began when Kublai Khan told Marco, begin at the beginning. By the time the apocalypse began, the world had already ended. It ended every day for a century or two. It ended, and another ending world spun in its place. It ended, and we woke up and ordered Greek coffees, drew the hot liquid through our teeth as everywhere the apocalypse rumbled, the apocalypse remembered, our dear, beloved apocalypse. It drifted slowly from the trees all around us, so loud we finally stopped hearing it. This is called Good Morning, You're Late, which is a feeling I have every morning. I think it was published in the New Republic. It was a kind of an older version that was published. So that one was called Good Morning America. So I guess both versions exist in parallel universes. And in this universe, this is the version of the poem. Good morning, you're late. Headline: The unthinkables already happened again. And so Laylene's perfect face swings back into the orbit of my grief. Catch up. It's the anniversary of the aftermath of another bad massacre, and I've got plenty of seats. Come in, I whisper to the wailing in the attic. Come in to the thunder, to any sound who'll shake me from doom's haze. Dispatches from Kenosha, Louisville, Atlanta arrive like a steady kick drum of sparrows spatchcocked by gravity, little nevers, little couldn'ts, too late to stop the video, too late, too late. I hold each stolen face against my forehead as the centuries slough off, flightless, century and its sides, century and its literal marks and mobs. As a child, I couldn't believe my luck. Born in the best country on earth. Now I know better. So what? Good morning, what's done is. Come in last year's wreck, rent, grief's a heavy planet and green. I know better than to call each gravity's daughter to my softest cheek. I know, and I know. So what? This is called First Encounter. It was winter in Wisconsin and late. And my mother was just going to be a minute inside the grocery store, maybe a Woodman's. And maybe she took a little longer than she'd expected. Maybe she got stuck at the register, or maybe it wasn't long at all. Maybe we three kids were happy in the car, drawing in the window's wet film, or tossing some toy, or wiping sweet dribble from my brother's cheek, his feet bound and bouncing. Maybe I led my sister in song or asked her questions. Really, I don't know how long we were there in the car before the cop came, tapped on the glass. I guess he must have spoken to us. And I'm sure we answered the way immigrant kids do, stowaway in headlights, words dribbling out of our mouths like frozen peas. Maybe our voices were too small and green for the officer to hear. Maybe they were crushed under his boots, lost between chirps on the radio. I remember his voice then, a dull smack, flat and efficient as a car horn when my mother finally, or after no time at all, came back. I think he asked her a sharp question and told her what she should have been afraid of, and my mother's words fluttered, limped, broken mouths, broken moths splashing at the cop's feet. I'm sure, as the oldest, I tried to help gather up the bright wings, scoop them in my small American jaw. Now, yes, I'm sure, I remember how the cop swatted away the swarm with the flick of his tongue, how his static cleared the air while our shipwrecked family lay gasping, gills wide. I don't know if my mother cried when he snapped the handcuffs around her wrists, if her face was wet and spilling over as she looked back at us, our palms and noses splotching the windows from the inside. I don't remember if she cried at the station when they pressed each finger to the ink and committed her fault lines to memory. I think she must have. I think that's what a mother would have done. I think the sound of her wail must have fallen straight down, like clear water, like a wave of applause, something that needs no translation into a ghost maker's tongue, just a siren spilling, just a single old word pushed and pushed into the air. Whew. That one's for my mom. Thinking about previous times that the world seemed to be ending, this one is called September 2001. I was in, I guess I'll give away what my approximate age, but I was in, I think, the 7th grade. Okay, September 2001. We were punished and salt slicked and wrecked with wanting we didn't understand. We were old enough to be obsessed with death, to dream of baseball bats and crushed skulls, to tongue scripture and lift our wetness toward extinction. It was the year 2001, and all day kids got pulled out of class, so slow and dreamlike it was like they dissolved, like the last scene in The Sandlot, boy after boy forever fading into a VHS afterlife. At lunch, Rita said, "We finally get our own war." And everyone knew it was bad of her to say so and laughed anyway. I was old enough to have wanted to run away from home, old enough to be grateful to have been born in America, to let the prophecies of plague string my spine with lights. Everything I didn't know was a throatful of something hot and bothered, the hair crawling up my calves, the shock that flew through me when Jake drew a picture of sex, the wreckage of birds I became when he felt me up in the hallway. I don't know what to call that feeling, only knew that I was on the edge of something as impressive and glorious as catastrophe, knowing my life mostly as a series of small, terrible stories. Elsewhere, children are being beaten in factories, beaten if they don't speak Japanese, stripped from their bones if they're born in the wrong country. That year, I fumbled everywhere for some authorized trajectory through my short-legged life. Any book could whisper a word to me that would name it, the exact shiver buzzing at my edges when the night lifted her foreign dress, when Omar's soccer friend called me a chink, or when the church girls laughed until I was sticky with fire. You have to understand, it was 2001. We'd made it through the prophesied apocalypse with its computerized rapture and bunkers full of pudding. Instead, there had been fireworks, though we'd been promised war. On television, face after face was saying, "I am an American. I wanted to fuck, then shoot the man who spoke to my mother like a child. I was so afraid of seeing dead people that I saw them everywhere. It was the new age. We finally had our own war. How can I explain the things and things and things I did wrong? I was never any good at telling the difference between what wanted me and what wanted me gone." How's everyone doing? Are we okay? We're doing okay? Okay. Thanks for being here again. I'm going to read a few poems now that are sort of in a series. It's 4 poems that all have the same title. And the last one sort of has a nod to an essay by Alexander Chee where he talks about a writing teacher who basically told him to cut out all the gerunds in his work. And she says something about like the tinnitus of that ing, ing, ing. So it makes reference to that. Yeah, some poems. Upon learning that some Korean War refugees used partially detonated napalm canisters as cooking fuel. Oh, hi, Allison. Oh, hey, Allison. Somewhere in a prior world, a woman with my face is scraping the seeds from an unborn hell. All night, doom rang from the sky. And in the morning, there are mouths to feed. There are crocks in the cellar and the ruined crops, the early frost, the neighbor's red daughter strung up in the square. What else to do when the unspeakable comes? What to burn when it doesn't? Somewhere in a world that didn't quite end, a woman like me is foraging for that which failed to kill her. She is cranking open modernity's throat, wrenching her arc from its scat. She is a woman who can hack an impossible morning into water, bean paste, bitter leaves, another chance to fumble toward the next chance and the next. Every day of my life has been something other than my last. Every day, an extinction misfires, and I put it to work. Upon learning that some Korean War refugees used partially detonated napalm canisters as cooking fuel. If a partway bomb, if a half-paused hell, if a killing failed can feed, if a death sentence incomplete, if a horror flopped, if extinction unlocks its jaw, if what doesn't kill you makes you, if almost, if never, if the friction of did not succeed, if someone harnessed annihilation in service of a stew, if someone me-like can see disaster's refuse and think dinner, if they can gather reeds and soften them with the genius of unconsummated doom, if I can almost love the bomb that didn't burst, then if a war that didn't end, if a war that didn't end helps me eat, if my swelling ends no hunger but my own, if my hunger ends not a thing. Upon learning that some Korean War refugees used partially detonated napalm canisters as cooking fuel. How did we get here, you'll think, kneeling with your neighbors in the parking lot as the para-police confiscate your coffee? How did it get to this, everyone will say, walking north on the interstate as the cities swarmed in orange, swallowed in smoke? How did this happen? Though it'll be the wrong question as they tear open your packages, escort you to a room where white-knuckled soldiers wait. Listen, I have a bad imagination. Dystopia is the word for what's already happened so many times. It's the reason you have clothes. No such thing as an undetonated hell. The pilot light clicks and I eat. Upon learning that some Korean War refugees used partially detonated napalm canisters as cooking fuel. I lie on the floor, partially bursting, partially stripped by the fact, drowning in the fact, slobbering like a dog in the heat of the fact. Here, on the other side of what happened, I make nothing happen. Nothing, 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 flaccid as a gerund, dead trees sharpening the sky. Once upon a time, the people whose nightmares I inherited were safe. Then they weren't, so they were never safe. They survived however they could. They made daughters who married well and were proud in ordinary ways, or they were ashamed. Days passed. They chased vultures from their mothers, were stuffed with bloody rags, watched fire shock their limbs into myth. Days and days. Here, in the inconceivable future, I am unable to narrate, to speak in the simple past, facts lined up like soldiers on a horizon. I'm making nothing happen but my own drool, drooling, gaping, chomping at the ing, ing, ing. I make a nothing that whirs into being, feedback looping into a buzzsaw of nothing, dome of nothing, so big it rises, big enough to keep my people safe from the catastrophes that rain from planes. Before each catastrophe, a moment in which my people are safe. Refuge of nothing, refuge of uneventfulness, first days, then days and days. In a dead tree's heart, an empty space. In the space, a small animal, useless, beautiful animal, stretching out its wings, wing, wing. Okay, I think that I'll actually just read, I may, let's see. I'll skip ahead a little bit just to make sure that I'm not taking up a million years of your time. This one is called Demilitarized Zone. I roll my suitcase through the demilitarized airport. I hand my demilitarized ticket to the demilitarized agent at the gate, who smiles in a demilitarized way, points with an open hand. On the plane, I order a demilitarized orange juice. I look down at the demilitarized mountains of Siberia and imagine walking on them. We land on the demilitarized runway, and the captain's voice over the loudspeaker is demilitarized as he asks us to stay in our seat. In the bathroom, I brush my demilitarized teeth. I get on the wrong demilitarized train and have to plead with the conductor, who does not have a gun. I watch the demilitarized pine trees filter the sun like a ceiling fan. I watch demilitarized cranes land on a lake so bright it makes me blink. The demilitarized conductor bows as he enters each train car. An old woman sits with demilitarized bundles wrapped in pink. At Pyongyang, I stopped for demilitarized noodles. The Taedong River is not full of bodies. The sun in the trees makes a noise like ee, ee. The sparrows in the buckwheat fields shout in Pukan accents and no guns. At Uiju, the platform is demilitarized. The taxi stand is not pockmarked with mines. I'd buy a demilitarized barley tea, and the shopkeeper hands me my change like she's responsible for me. In the demilitarized record hall, I hand over a slip of demilitarized paper, and the clerk smiles at my accent. You've traveled a long way, she says, as she leads me to the demilitarized stacks. We find my family's genealogy book. We turn to the last generation, recorded before the world ended and our line split to the south. I unfold my paper with a list of missing names. The clerk copies the letters as I read them. Together, we demilitarize my family. The sun coming through the windows says, ah, ah. And I'll just end with a last poem. This book, Soft Science, really came out of trying to think about and speak to a number of figures in pop culture who were, for a lack of more precise language, Asian robot ladies. This one, in particular, this character Kyoko in the movie Ex Machina, for those who have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, she is at the end. She's a robot who is basically like a house servant, a domestic servant, and sex slave of this character in the book, who's like this like rich tech bro, and she's had her language capabilities stripped from her because she, like, in order to preserve his company's trade secrets or something. And so I felt so much affinity with her and kinship with her, like bizarre, perverse, deeply sad kinship with her. And I imagine what it might be like for her to speak. You know, it's not that she like can understand language and but isn't allowed to say anything. She like has had her language abilities stripped. So I wrote this poem in her voice. I wrote a few poems in her voice, and most of them ended up getting cut from the book, but this one stayed. Yeah, I feel that it might be appropriate to end with these imagined words. Yeah, by this character who this Asian and feminized character who taught me so much about what it means to, what wisdom there actually is to be found in learning what it is like to live as an object. Yeah, so this poem is called Kyoko's Language Files Are Recovered Following Extensive Damage to Her CPU. It's sort of a weird poem, so I hardly ever read it at readings, but I'll read it tonight. Can they think? Animal language, hoof, slug, enterprise. Can machines, can they? Claw, egg tooth, feral. An aphorism, anaphora. Can mouth? How? In fact, in some languages, algorithm, acronym, maybe dolls and spirits. But can it fuck? Chicken, clit, sternum. But is it language? Dolphins, bee harmony, bacterial questions. Maybe it tells you something. Can chickens think? Obedient subjects, usual species. Train her to peel. You can ask her, she would. The poor apes. But do the bees know they are bees? Dude, you're wasting your time. Communicable disease, predatory, grass seed, about 500 species. When she picks up the tray, if, then, therefore. When she picks up the knife, database search, insect, sheepskin, toothache. Interested in your response. Blue, blue, oh blue. That's not evolution. Infant, chicken, no indication. She would enjoy it. Sends a pleasure response. All I'm saying is, the emergence of language, it's generally assumed, history, art, symbolism, and so on, among many hominids, or that self-same hardwired solace say as other creatures. You have such strong hands. Oh, knife, oh, knife. Like other creatures, can machines, can mouth, animal, can metal. There are things to say, some things which appear, signaling systems. Say, flowers with bees. Birds say, slug. Enjoy, for example. Stimulus, relevant cry. If, then, therefore. Say, cry. Say, knife, oh knife, oh knife. Okay, that's all for me. Thank you all. Thanks you all for listening, for being here. Thanks. Oh, goodness.